The storyteller welcomes you to another nightmare. Plug in your earphones, close your eyes, and let us begin.
It was late, later than I realized, really almost past midnight when I was driving home, heading back from a long night out in Kentucky. And I never thought I'd be telling you this story. Not because I didn't want to, but because after it happened, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to remember some things. Well, maybe they shouldn't be remembered, but here I am, talking about it, and I still don't know if I should have stopped. It was dark out, the kind of dark that eats everything around you. A stretch of road I'd driven down hundreds of times before. Only tonight felt different. The air was thick, almost alive, and the car, well, it was the only thing that kept me grounded, kept me from spiraling into that silence. As I cruised down the road, something caught my eye, something out of place. A figure, a man, standing by the side of the highway. He was disoriented, stumbling. At first, I thought it was just a guy who'd had too much to drink. I mean, it wasn't exactly uncommon to see someone on that stretch of road late at night, but something about him felt wrong. I pulled over. I don't know why I did it. I could have kept going, just driven past him like every other car did that night. But I stopped, and as soon as I did, I could feel it. Something was wrong. He was strange. His eyes wild, bloodshot. He didn't seem to care at all about the fact that a stranger had pulled over for him. In fact, when I asked if he was all right, he didn't even respond. He just got in, and that was when I should have known. He didn't even thank me, just sat there, staring at the road. I tried to make conversation. Small talk, ask where he was going, if he was okay. But he didn't respond, not at first. Just stared ahead, his hands in his lap, his legs stiff like he was paralyzed. I asked again, trying to get something out of him. And then he spoke. I need to go home, but I never made it. Those words, they didn't make sense, but they didn't need to. Not right then. I just didn't want to think about it. I thought, maybe this guy's had a rough night. And that was the moment when my stomach sank. He looked so far gone, like he wasn't even really there. His eyes, no life in them, like he was a walking corpse. I shook it off, told myself I was being paranoid. I drove. I kept glancing over at him every few seconds. I thought maybe if I kept the conversation going, I'd feel less uneasy, less like something was watching me. But then I looked over to offer him a drink, and he was gone. Gone. Just like that. No sound. No movement. No trace. I slammed the brakes, my heart racing. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, staring at the passenger seat. I called out. I yelled his name, hoping he was still there. Maybe he'd slipped into the back seat, I thought. But no, nothing. There was only the empty highway behind me. I got out of the car. I searched the road, the grass. I ran down the highway. I called out again. I even ran into the woods a little, thinking he must have wandered off, but there was no sign of him. And the strangest thing was, there was no sound, just the night, the eerie silence. I got back in the car, my heart still pounding. I drove off again, shaking my head, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then the thought hit me, that guy, he'd said he needed to go home, but he never made it. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just picked up someone who wasn't supposed to be there, someone who wasn't alive. But I didn't have any answers, just confusion, a dread that crawled under my skin. The next day, I asked around. just casually, you know? I didn't expect anyone to know anything. But then, one of the locals looked at me. He went pale. That stretch of road, there's been rumors. A man, he died there years ago, in a car crash. They say his ghost still haunts it. Sometimes, he shows up as a hitchhiker, just like you described. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said that, and that was when I knew. I wasn't imagining it. That man, the one I'd picked up, he wasn't just lost on that road. He was stuck, and I was the one who had driven him to his final resting place. I never took that road again, and I never wanted to, because sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped. What would have happened if I'd kept driving? And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one waiting on that road. Before we move on to the next story, if you like true scary stories, please subscribe to Storyteller and click the bell icon for more creepy tales every week. It was late, too late really. I had just finished a grueling study session at my college in New Mexico and was heading home. But what was supposed to be a quiet drive turned into something I can never forget. I thought I knew this road well. After all, I had driven it hundreds of times. But that night, I found out how little I actually knew about the road and about what was waiting for me. It was nearly midnight when I left campus. The kind of hour when everything feels a little off, especially out in the country. The air was heavy, and the headlights from my car barely sliced through the thick darkness. It was a kind of night where every sound feels too loud, like the world is holding its breath. I was driving, thinking about how exhausted I was, when I saw him. A man, he was standing there, right on the edge of the road. He looked cold, vulnerable. His clothes were torn, and his face was hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. And the way he was standing there, it was almost like he was waiting for something, for someone. He looked out of place, the kind of place where no one should be standing in the middle of the night. I slowed down, my heart was pounding in my chest, but it was like something inside me, some strange feeling of responsibility, told me to stop. "Hey, do you need a ride?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. The man didn't hesitate. He walked toward the car, and without a word, climbed into the passenger seat. There was something unsettling about him, the way he moved, like he wasn't fully present, like he was disconnected from reality. I tried to make conversation. I had to, otherwise I'd go insane from the silence. "Where you headed?" I asked. No response. I asked again, "Do you live nearby?" Still nothing. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, but he didn't even look at me. He just stared ahead, the kind of stare that it wasn't human, at least not in the way I understood it. He was shivering. I could see it, even in the dim light of the car, his shoulders trembling. I offered him my jacket, but he didn't respond. He just sat there, staring into the night. As we drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every glance I threw at him felt more unsettling than the last. It was like he wasn't really there. He wasn't responding to anything I said. He wasn't even alive. And yet, he was there right next to me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a guy who had fallen on hard times. But when I reached my destination, that's when everything changed. I turned to look at him, and that's when I saw it. The seat, empty, Completely empty. No sign of him. I froze. I didn't even register what was happening at first. My mind was scrambling, trying to make sense of it. He had been right there. I had seen him just seconds ago. And now, nothing. Just a cold, empty passenger seat. I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe he had slipped out of the car when I wasn't looking, but there was no way he could have gotten out that fast. I got out of the car. I looked around. There was no sign of him, no footprints, no trace. The road was empty. The parking lot was empty. My heart was in my throat. I even checked the back seat, even though I knew it was impossible for him to be there. Nothing. I don't know why, but I drove off. I should have called the cops. I should have told someone, anyone, but I didn't. I was too freaked out. I just wanted to get away from there. I asked around the next day. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. But then a local told me something that made my blood run cold. You saw him, didn't you? They said. The boy who was lost. I stared at them. The boy who was lost? There was a guy, a young man, just like you described. He disappeared on that stretch of road a few years back. Never found. His body, nothing. They say his ghost haunts that road, looking for someone to give him a ride. He's never made it home, and he won't either. I drove down that road every night after that, but I never saw him again. I don't know if it was him that night, or if I just picked up someone who was already gone. But the worst part, I still hear his voice sometimes. Quiet, like it's coming from the seat next to me. Maybe he wasn't lost. Maybe he was just waiting for someone to take him home. But what if I was the one who took him where he never wanted to go? And what if he's still out there waiting for someone else?